In 5. You are good to go, Brother Denny.
Welcome back, everyone, to our study of Ecclesiastes. It has been a real joy for me to be able to teach this class, and I just love this book and love this material so much, and have always enjoyed studying and always learning something new, it seems, every time I go through it. What Solomon has done with this sermon, and we've emphasized that this is a sermon being preached by the preacher, he says, is addressing the point that vanity of vanities, all is vanity. But then he changes that, well, that is true if there's no God in the equation. If we don't have God in our lives, then everything we do, everything that we are, is in fact vain, futile, worthless. But with God, that's what makes us special, makes us valuable, makes life worth living. And so he's asking the question in chapter 2 and verse 3, what is it that I can tell people is the good that they need to do in their lives, in the short time of their lives? And as he was wrapping up this sermon in chapter 11, we really have the preacher's invitation, the invitation to his sermon. And he has keys to successful living. And these are keys to successful living with life with God. When you have God in your life, then you are not going to be consumed with covetousness and selfishness, but you're going to want to share. Life with God is a life that has trust, genuine trust, where you really can live your life free from anxiety. You can practice 1 Peter 5:7. You can cast all your cares upon him because he cares for you. And you trust him. You believe in him. You don't just say that you believe that he's all powerful. You live with that conviction and demonstrate it with your trust in him and your faith in him and his word. And then third, Solomon talked about the key to successful living is work. The idea that trust in God doesn't mean that we just sit back and assume that God is going to do everything for us, because he's not. He has commanded us to work, and then he blesses us with that good work ethic, because that's the way he created us and designed us to be people that do in fact work. And then he talked about living life with optimism. You know, it seems like every age has had its negative things that really could ruin life and destroy one from having any kind of optimistic outlook at all. And so we really can't point to the 21st century and say we've got more negative than anybody else has had. That's really probably not true. But that said, we do have our share of negatives, and those negatives can destroy the optimistic outlook if we'll let them. But life with God, and if we truly have that trust in God, then we can live life with that high degree of optimism. And that leads to the next point of happiness. We can be happy. We can rejoice in the Lord always, Paul says. And again, I say rejoice, Philippians 4 and verse 4. So we can have that joy, that optimism that is found in being in a relationship with God, being in Christ. And then the last point that he made, which really is the first point of chapter 12. And so there was kind of a poor chapter break, but nevertheless, I'm getting ahead of myself. Enjoy life. is his final admonition of chapter 11, where to the young man, take advantage of opportunities that you have in the days of youth to do what your heart desires and what your eyes see that they want to do. That's the time to do those things, to go enjoy life, because as you get older, there's going to be less opportunity and will be less desire to do those things. But he also put a qualifier on that. And that qualifier was to remember that God's going to hold you in account for all those things that you do. So there are thousands of things that a young man could do that are all perfectly fine and would be God approved, from traveling the world to sailing the oceans to hiking the highest mountains. God has no objection to any of those things. As a matter of fact, it's enjoying God's creation. Why would he not want us to do those things? But we also know that one of the struggles of youth is those youthful lusts. And as we mentioned at the conclusion of our study in our last class, Paul had to tell Timothy, who was a young man, to flee youthful lusts. And so Solomon says, you've got to know that God's going to hold you accountable for all the choices that you've made. So make sure that you make good choices, choices that are good and pure and right to do. And then there is no problem whatsoever with any of that. So those admonitions to the young then are to rejoice, follow your heart, follow the desires of your eyes. And again, I made the point that neither of those words, follow or the word desire, carry with it a sinful, evil connotation. They can be, but they don't necessarily mean that. Then to make those decisions with God's judgment in mind. He also tells them to remove vexation and pain. If you've got opportunity to get rid of that headache, take some aspirin. If you've got opportunity to make yourself more comfortable, then put on more comfortable clothes. If your skin is dry, put some oil on it. But there's no reason not to take advantage of ways to make yourself comfortable. If you can get rid of pain, then do it. Vexation is internal anxiety and stress, and then pain is external. So we do struggle with internal and external ailments. Well, there are some solutions to those things, and we ought to take advantage of those. Because, and I'm going to get ahead of myself a little bit, but while we're talking about this, he is going to talk about the progress, sometimes quick, plunging into old age. And with old age, there come less remedies, less ways that you can get comfortable, less ways that you can relieve the pain. So while you're young, and there are some solutions out there, then you would be silly and not to take advantage of those. So poor chapter break, as we go into chapter 12, he also says, remember your creator, or remember also your creator. So the chapter break separates the series of admonitions, but as you can see on the screen, it actually is the sixth admonition that Solomon is giving to the young man. It's interesting that he says to remember your creator. There are so many different ways that the Bible describes our God, and each one of them is special in their own way, and kind of shows us some of the wonderful characteristics and attributes of our God. I like in Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. Well, when we think about God as shepherd, then we're thinking about all the attributes of a shepherd, and what a shepherd is and what a shepherd does for the sheep. And so it's neat to think about God as shepherd. We can think about God as the El Shaddai, the all powerful, and what that means. Well, here, the admonition to the young man is to remember your creator. To remember God as creator is, first of all, to remember his power, because you can't create, I can't create, but God can create. And so to remember him as creator, that's especially important for youth to remember, because sometimes youth are full of themselves and they kind of see themselves as more powerful than they really are. And so to remember God as creator is to remember his power, and it should bring a little bit of humility and submissiveness to God because of his great power, and it should um, alleviate or eliminate arrogance and pride in the heart of youth. What God has done is what no other being can do, and that is he can create. And the creator is always superior to that which is created. So remember your creator is to remember his power. Secondly, to remember your creator is to remember his knowledge. Uh, Imagine, as best we can with our finite minds, the knowledge that would exist in the mind of God in order to create this universe and to establish it in such a way that it would continue to operate so beautifully. Our Maker understands everything that there is about the distance between the earth and the sun, everything that is a part of what is required in order to sustain life on this earth, and the balance between nature and man. And God knows everything. As we talk about, he is omniscient, he is all knowing. Well, David reminds us in Psalm 139 that our God thoroughly understands us. He knows when we get up, he knows when we lie down, he knows our thoughts before we even think them, because he knows us so thoroughly inside and out. Every tick, even why we tick, every thought, even why we think it. And so uh, to remember our creator is to remember the incredible power of our creator. And then also to remember your creator is to remember the plans that your creator has for you. God didn't just create us and then abandon us. He didn't just stick us on this planet and then disappear. But he created us and then afforded us great opportunity to live our lives for him, to serve him, and then to live our lives in such a way that we are prepared to meet him one day in judgment. And then hopefully, if we lived our lives well, to spend eternity with him. So Solomon notes that the body will perish and the spirit will return back to God who gave it. As creator, he created that spirit, gave us that spirit. So we need to remember God. We need to think of him as our creator. Well, along that point, then, the theory of evolution is not only false, but it is dangerous because, first of all, it removes God. In the theory of evolution, there is no God, there is no creator. And so what you're left with is atheism, or still bad. Agnosticism, where you're not really sure whether you believe that there's a God or not. So that is one of the consequences of the theory of evolution. But it also reduces man, it removes man, God, and then reduces man to insignificance. Because all you are is some amoeba, some little slime that crawled out of the muck, and over millions of years eventually evolved into your present state. Well, how does that exalt man? How does that uh, demonstrate the wonderful power of God in creating us? We've made the point before, but it certainly fits in here, that if you have design, you need to have a designer. Paul is going to make the point in Romans chapter 1 that there are two invisible attributes that we learn about God when we look at the creation. So to remember our Creator, Paul would say, first of all, is to demonstrate his power and his nature. Well, the power that he could create something this magnificent in the human body, in the world that we live in, but also the beauty of the creation with the sunrise and the sunset and the oceans and the streams and the mountains and the beauty of the snowfall uh, reminds us that God didn't have to make it this beautiful, but it tells something about his nature when we look at the creation. So those attributes of God, Paul says, are clearly seen through what has been made. So remember your creator. You know, this isn't an admonition just for young men. It's an admonition for all of us to think about our God, but think about our God in the sense of his being our creator. And we will certainly be better off if we do just that. We think about God, we think about his role in our lives as our creator. All right, he says, remember our creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, when you will say, I have no delight in them. The evil days that he is describing. And if you've been with me since class number 1, you're probably saying, I already know where Denny's going to go with this. He's not going to say evil in the sense of Satan and satanic and so on. He's using the word evil in the sense that they're hard days, they're bad days, they are difficult days, challenging days. So he's talking about the difficult days of old age, not to moral decline, evil, sinful days. But these evil days, he's going to make the following observation. All people will endure these days if they live long enough. Maybe there are a few exceptions. You might know somebody that he died near 90 years old, and they really never had any major health problems. The eyes were still good, the ears were still good, the back was still strong, the legs were still strong, and the mind was just as sharp as it always was. Well, maybe every once in a while there are these anomalies, but most of the time, maybe a vast majority of the time, there are going to be people that you're going to have these tough days if you live long enough. And I think all of us could certainly confirm that we've known people that in the later stages of their life, in old age, they did have eye problems, ear problems. Their mind wasn't as sharp as it used to be, and so on. Second, Solomon wants to make this point. Mental breakdowns will impede one's relationship with God. So remember your creator in the days of your youth, because when you become older, you may not have the mental faculties in order to, uh, well, make some changes, do some things that would repair a relationship with God. Young men, now is the time to establish that relationship with God, to think about Him, because uh, dementia, also Alzheimer's, may set in, and you're not going to be able to make those good soul saving decisions once you get to that period of life. But third, he also is going to make the point that physical breakdowns will, and that should be impede, sorry about that, just now saw that, will impede one's relationship with God. You get to where you don't feel good. You are really struggling with the fact that you don't feel good. And as a result, your mind may still be sharp, but if you're dealing with a lot of pain, or you're dealing with some physical handicaps, it can impact your relationship with God. When somebody doesn't feel good, and they don't want to do anything, they're not going to be all energetic and ready to get after a new project. When our bodies hurt, it demands our attention, and it may keep our attention from God. So this is where he is going with this whole thing. We don't have forever to figure things out. God has not given us unlimited time to see him as our creator, to prepare ourselves for the day of judgment. Those hard days, difficult days, the days where there's mental decline, physical decline, that will be too late. And then, of course, when one dies, as he already made very clear in chapter 9, then it's definitely too late. So now is the time when, especially in the days of youth, when as we're journeying through life, we have things sorted out in proper order. And that way, when we have reached that point in our life of maybe senility and physical breakdown, we're already good with God. We already had a well-established, strong relationship with him, because as Solomon has said, when death occurs, opportunities are gone. And if our lives were a mess, we're not going to be able to fix them when we've lost our minds in old age. And we're certainly not going to be able to fix our life if we are dead. So now is the time for serious self-assessment. Now is the time to remember your creator, as the point that he's making. And he uses the word before. Before these difficult days come is really an important and noteworthy observation on Solomon's part. A solid relationship with God needs to be founded in youth. It needs to be nurtured and developed in the middle age, and then it is solidified in old age. The aged have so many concerns that it can impact their ability to change. And also, as we know, the old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, you've got that adage, or that person is set in their ways. Well, those are things that are fairly common and indicative in old age. Well, if you're set in your ways and your ways were not God's ways, then that's bad. And obviously, it's going to impact where somebody spends for eternity. So now is our chance, or those that are young chance, and those of us that are maybe a little bit older, but we still have our faculties about us. Um, Now's the time to make sure that our relationship with God is a good one. The old time commentator Matthew Henry had in his commentary on the whole Bible, page 669, a, uh, a statement about this verse that I thought was so good. I'm just going to read the whole thing to you. And, I tell my students never read a long reading to someone because they'll have the tendency to to drift off. So I'm going to violate I'm going to violate my own principle and read something. But I think this is so good; it's worth listening to. Matthew Henry, his commentary on the whole Bible, page 669. How many are the calamities of old age, and that if we should live to be old, our days will be such as we will have no pleasure in, which is a good reason why we should return to God and make our peace with him in the days of our youth, and not put it off uh, till we till we come to be old. For it will be no thanks to us to leave the pleasures of sin when they have left us. Let me repeat that. For it will be no thanks to us to leave the pleasures of sin when they have left us. Oh, what credit is there if now you don't do those pleasures of sin because you don't want to anymore? Well, there's no credit. Nor return to God when need forces us. It is the greatest absurdity and ingratitude imaginable to give the cream and flower of our days to the devil and reserve the bran and the refuse and the dregs of them for God. This is offering the torn and the lame and the sick for sacrifice. And besides, old age being thus clogged with infirmities, it is the greatest folly imaginable to put off that needful work till then, which requires the best of our strength when our faculties are in their prime, and especially to make the work more difficult by a longer continuance in sin and laying up treasures of guilt in the conscience, and to add to the burdens of age and to make them much heavier. If the calamities of age will be such as are here represented, we shall have need of something to support and comfort us then, when nothing will be more effectual to do that than the testimony of our consciences for us that we begin betimes to remember our Creator and have not since laid aside the remembrance of him. How can we expect God should help us when we are old if we did not serve him when we were young? You know, Paul had in the last days of his life the benefit of good memories of how he lived his life. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. Therefore, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness. We want to be able to reflect back over our lives and be happy with the way that we live our lives. You know, as Paul moves into the practical section of the book of Romans, in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, that you may prove what the good, perfect, and acceptable will of God is. Did you notice, though, that we are to give our bodies as an acceptable and holy sacrifice to God? Well, what kind of animal sacrifices did God ask for? Well, he asked for young, 1 year old, male lamb or goat. And it was to be without disease, without broken bone, without any flaw or defect. God would not accept junk sacrifices, sacrifices that were of no value to the rancher, just a lame animal. Well, are we going to give God our lame and aged bodies that are no longer able to really do anything? I was privileged to teach a woman that was in her late 80s the gospel of Christ, baptized her into Christ, and so she became a New Testament Christian. And in the few years of her life, she said to me on many occasions, Denny, it just torments me that I have so little that I could give to God. Her body was racked with pain and old age. She was in a wheelchair. There was so little that she could do, and it bothered her. Well, with her, God, He saved her late in life. But for those of us that were Christians from our youth on, that this is our chance, our opportunity, while we do have the mental capacity and the physical ability in order to do the work of God, because it is work and it does require sometimes hard, diligent work. So those evil days, those hard days, those difficult days are in fact going to come. And so we've got to remember our Creator before they come, Solomon says. Did you see in the text, before these days come? Because Solomon is acknowledging there can be that time when it is too late. And certainly it is too late for everybody at death. So before those evil days come, that's the time to remember God. That is the time to establish that relationship with God. Okay. I think we have well established that particular point. So you're going to get to the point where you say, I have no delight in them. Because you don't feel good, you don't have the energy, the body is in pain, the body parts, the eyes, the ears, the legs, they don't work all that well. And so you're not going to want to climb the mountains and sail the oceans and do all those things that you might have wanted to do when you were young. But instead, your attitude is, I don't have any delight in them. You've got enough troubles and health concerns that you openly confess. Notice Solomon says, you will say that I have no delight in them. So there's really nothing left in life to be enjoyed. So once old age sets in, there's not a whole lot that could be done. And there's certainly a whole lot more that we have with medical advances today than Solomon had in his time. But the fact is, their medical advances don't stop the onset of old age and cannot completely eliminate the aches and pains. We certainly have no medical answer to dementia and Alzheimer's. So it's going to happen. And so we need to remember him before those difficult days come. And he says, before the sun, the light, the moon, the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. All of that is merely describing one's incapacity to enjoy things. When you're young, you just really love the sun and you love being outdoors. You loved enjoying the creation of God at nighttime. seeing the moon and the stars. Well, uh, people that are old, they don't enjoy those things like they did when they were young. Maybe they don't enjoy them at all. So there have been people, and maybe you've got some resources in your library where someone has tried to make um, uh, application. The sun represents this, and the moon represents something else. I don't see Solomon doing any of those things at all. It's just these are images that represent life and things that younger people enjoy, and older people not so much. Then in verse 3, he is going to be more specific as to why the capacity for joy has faded. And he's going to portray through allegory the frequently plagued problems of old age. First, he talks about in the day that the watchmen of the house tremble. The watchmen, in all probability, are the arms. They're the ones that protect the house, which is our body. And so when there are things that are coming that are going to endanger us, our natural reaction is to use our arms and to protect ourselves. Well, the watchmen of the house tremble. So now they're not the strong arms that they used to be, that are quick to react and defend the body, but now they tremble. The hands, the arms that were once strong are now weak and feeble, and they tremble. And then second, he says, and the mighty men stoop. Uh, well, the fact that he says mighty men in the plural uh, makes me think that he's talking about legs, since it's in the plural as opposed to the back, which some people say the stooping does kind of portray an old man that is now kind of bent over with the back. And it could mean that. I tend to think, because of the plural, the legs are just not as strong as they once were to have him upright and strong. And then third, he says, and the grinding ones stand idle because they are few. This has reference to the teeth of the ages. The aged archaeologists have discovered many tombs and bodies of those that lived 1,000 years, 2,000 years ago. Well, it's not uncommon to find the skull of them that's missing teeth, sometimes several teeth. Dentistry in ancient times was basically, if that tooth hurts, well, lean over here and I'll yank it out. So now that was the solution to tooth pain, is just get rid of it. So they're not grinding as much as they used to because they don't have as many teeth to grind as they once did. And then he says, and those that look through windows grow dim. So not only are you lost your teeth, but you've lost your eyesight as well. The gradual decline of one's eyesight, you may be looking out a window, but he doesn't really see a whole lot except a bunch of blurred images. And even today with modern technology with eyeglasses, you still could eventually lose your eyesight. And then in verse 4, and the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low. Well, you'll close a door in order to maybe close off some of the sound that is going on. So it seems like again, he's talking about one's hearing, the sound of the grinding mill, an activity that is very noisy, actually, is one that you don't even hear it at all. But he says is low. So you kind of hear it, but it's not really making that loud of noise. And so as the eyesight's gone bad, the hearing has gone bad as well. Then he says, and one will arise the sound of the bird. People have interpreted this different ways, and I've had some older people that have said they can't hear hardly anything anymore, but it is amazing how even the slightest sound will awaken them from their sleep in the night or in the morning. And so Solomon is kind of saying you don't hear most everything, but then even sometimes the slightest thing you do hear that. Or it could be that what the old person is hearing is not really something that's external, but it sounds within his own mind. And he's hearing the chirping of birds. There aren't really any birds there. If there were, he couldn't hear them. But he's remembering the sound of birds singing, birds chirping, and that's what is waking him up. So I don't know. You can go with either definition on that. No sense being dogmatic for sure. And then he says, and the daughters of song sing softly. Well, this phrase is difficult, but it seems best to continue seeing it as describing a physical element. And the daughters of song then would young women that can really project their voice. Now he just doesn't have a strong voice. And the voice has grown very soft. It's grown very weak with the onset of the years. And I can certainly relate to that. Having been a teacher for over 40 years, my voice is just not as strong as it used to be. And definitely my singing voice is not as strong as it used to be. I seem to have a raspy voice all the time anymore. And excuse me for constantly clearing my voice. My wife says, you clear your voice, your throat a lot. Well, sorry about that. It's the onset of old age. I'm going to blame it on that. So, and then he says, verse 5, furthermore, there's more to the gradual decline. And I laugh because I read that and I think, Solomon, I would have been perfectly okay if you had stopped right there, because there's already been enough physical breakdowns. You don't have to pile on with the physical breakdowns, but there's more. Furthermore, he says, men are afraid. All right. So things that a young man wouldn't be afraid of at all now become very frightful things to an old man. Like what? Like a high place. Young men are fearless, and they can climb the mountains, and they can do rock climbing, cliff climbing, and all that. And the fact that they're on a sheer cliff and it's 1,000 feet down, it doesn't bother them. But now it does. And part of the reason it does is because they're not as stable on their feet as they used to be. And as a young man, they might be able to get right on the edge, and they're not concerned at all about losing their footing and falling. An old person, they're going to stay by the rail. Thank you very much. They're not going to even get close to the edge. Thank you very much. just because those legs are not as stable as they used to be. And then the second thing that they're afraid of are terrors on the road. Um, you know, um, the Bible described Joab as one that drove his chariot fiercely, carelessly, wildly. Well, apparently they had their young, reckless drivers on the road in their day, but man, I don't know that Solomon could have envisioned what we have to deal with today with the crazies out there that are typically some young person that is weaving in and out of traffic and going way over the speed limit. And well, yeah, terrors on the road. And I remember my mother actually drove late into her life, her late 80s, and but it just scared her to death the way people would get right up on her bumper because she wasn't driving fast enough, or they'd spin around and then cut her off. And so it was terrors on the road for sure. Well, so high places and terrors on the road are what create fear. And then he says the almond tree blossoms. This is referring to the graying of the hair. With the almond tree, you would have the uh, the the blossoms that would turn white. Well, so that's what's happening to the hair, and as they say, that the hair is either going to turn gray or it's going to turn loose. Well, with me, it decided to go with the turn loose for sure, but not with everybody. That just turns gray. Well, the almond tree blossoms, that's what that's referring to. And then next, and this is the ninth one of his description of the body and its breakdown, the grasshopper drags himself along. I don't know if you've ever, as a child, witnessed a grasshopper that they have such frail legs and easy for them to get broken or whatever. And so they're just kind of dragging themselves along. Well, this describes the trouble that the aged have in moving. Going from one place to another is very difficult for older people, especially long distances, stairs, uneven terrain are all going to be a problem for people that are old. And so they kind of have to drag themselves along if they're going to travel at all. And then next he says the caperberry is ineffective. The caperberry in ancient times was known as an aphrodisiac. And so we assume that what Solomon means is that the sexual drive is no longer there. And even things that were used, the ancient Viagra, well, it doesn't work anymore. You can take as much of that Viagra as you want. You're still not going to be able to be sexually active. So the last clause that begins with the word for, he says, for the man goes to his eternal home while mourners go about in the streets. So while the person being described is moving toward death, the people that are not that close to death, that are still relatively young, they are mourning in the streets. The whole process is a sad process for sure. And, I don't know about you, but as we talk about the eventual demise of the physical body, we've joked about some things, but they're evil days. They are difficult days, hard days. And those people that are going through those days, they don't think they're funny at all. They're really making life uh, very hard, and there's hard to find joy in those days. And so the whole process that eventually leads to death is what brings out the mourners, because it is a sad event. God designed us and put Adam and Eve in the garden, made them where they had access to the tree of life. So their bodies were not going to age, they were not going to see pain. But because of sin, they were sent out of the garden. They were removed from having access to the tree of life. And so, God said, the day that you eat, you shall surely die. And from a physical standpoint, that's what began on that day, is that journey towards death. That's why when we read in Revelation 21 that we're going to have no tears, no pain, no sorrow. 1 Corinthians 15, the mortal is going to put on immortality. The perishable will become imperishable. So the great message of the gospel is that we're going to receive a new body that is not going to have to struggle with these breakdowns. Then in verse 6, he repeats the word before. And that's why every major translation that I know of repeats the words, remember him, because that is accurate. We do need those words brought down, because that's exactly what he's saying. Remember him before. And he says before, and then he uses four other metaphors. Metaphor number one, before the silver cord is broken. All right, so the cord that is your cord of life is one that is going to snap, and the fact that it's a silver cord shows how valuable life is. And then second, the golden bowl is crushed. So now you have a bowl, and it's a very valuable bowl. It's a golden bowl. And that particular bowl is crushed. And then third, the pitcher by the well is shattered. So this metaphor seems to be describing the pitcher that was a part of a water system, a well, where you would crank down into the water and it would fill up, and then you would crank it back up. And well, that pitcher by the well is shattered. It once was one that served well in serving the water, but now it breaks. All of these are images that are describing the death of a person, and the body is now dead. The fourth metaphor, then, the wheel at the cistern is crushed. So you've got this well, and on top of the well, you've got this wheel that the rope goes over, and then that's what you wind to bring the pitcher up and down in getting the water. And so now that wheel, as Solomon says, is crushed. It is no longer able to sustain the weight of the pitcher that has full of water, and it goes crashing down to the bottom of the well. So that which was functioning, that which was valuable, that which was precious is now gone, and it is useless. So the body that functioned so well in the days of youth is now a body that is no longer functioning, and then eventually is crushed in death. So with these four metaphors, Solomon is able to vividly portray the transition from the young, healthy body to now a body that is old, wrecked with pain, fragile, valuable, to no longer valuable because the precious body found in youth is gone, and then it ends in death. The cistern is crushed. That's death. So he says in verse 7, then the dust will return to the earth as it was. The Bible says that we were created out of dust. You go to Genesis 2, verse 7, Genesis 3, and verse 19. So we were created out of dust, and we will return to dust. But what about that life force that we read about in Genesis 2:7, that God breathed into his nostrils and man became a living soul, a living being? Well, the spirit returns to God who gave it. Now, I mentioned this in the last class, but we need to repeat it here. The spirit is in reference to your life force. God took the body that had all the parts because he created it out of the dust, but it was not yet alive. It's not until God gives that spirit that the body becomes alive, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Now, commentators they disagree as to the implications of this particular terminology. Some would say that this is not an optimistic allusion to some kind of consciousness after death, but simply stating a pre-birth, pre-life condition, that God temporarily reunited the body and spirit so that the body was alive, but eventually the body's going to die and the spirit is going to back to God who gave it. And that's his only point. There are others, though, who argue that in this statement, there is, although somewhat veiled, the idea that why does the spirit go up and return to God who gave it? That the whole language hints at a continued existence. Well, I tend to go that direction. We made the point before of 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 10, whereas the Old Testament gave hints of there being an afterlife and never really comes right out and describes an afterlife, but that was God's plan all along. 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 10 says that God made brought life and immortality to light through the gospel. So it was God's plan that it be the gospel of Christ that was going to bring the afterlife into clarity. And so that's why we have such a clearer view of what's going to happen next and the assurance of an afterlife. Whereas in the Old Testament, it wasn't God's plan that those things be revealed. In chapter 3 and verse 21, Solomon was comparing man and beast. And remember, he made the statement there, what is the comparison between man and beast? Because they both die and they both go to dust. And then he asked the question in 3:21, who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the beast goes downward? And I made the observation there that he doesn't answer the question there in chapter 3, probably because he knew that he was going to answer the question in chapter 12 and verse 7. And here we are, and the question is being answered. The spirit of man does go upward. The spirit of man does go to God. Excuse me. Does go to God who gave it. And so now the question is answered. And I believe that it tells us that the spirit is more than just the life force of man, that it really describes his total makeup. Uh, so the spirit returns to God who gave it. I have a good friend of mine, his name is Dan Owen, who wrote a poem that, again, I'm going to violate my own principle twice in the same class with reading something that is long. But I thought he did such a good job of describing the eventual demise and breakdown of the body that ends in death. Again, this is written by Dan Owen, and it's called This Earthly Shell. This earthly shell is home to me. I've lived here all along. I've worn it every single day. I got it from my mom. I've stretched it, scraped it, cracked it too. I've grown it up and outward, though, through. Grown it up and outward through the many decades of my life, through joy and pain, through peace and strife. And while it feels like home to me, I look at it and I can see it fading toward eternity. The face once smooth just sags a bit. The hair once dark is thinned and sits a bit more sparsely on this head and looks a lot like Dad, now dead. My arms, which once were hard and firm, are sagging loose, and so I learn to lift and push more carefully so I can suffer sparingly. While on my bed I toss and turn when muscles ache and nerves may burn. And I wonder how this house I love has cracked and chipped with every shove and faded from the sun above. I fixed my house a bunch of times when walls were cracked and roof was torn. I've hired the best to make repairs when plumbing failed or cracks were formed. I've had the roof repaired a bit, old boards removed and new ones fit. The attic's air still moving through, but cobwebs thrive, and quite a few. The air conditioning's on the blink, the windows fog, and one would think that a nail here and some paint there could make the old place easier to bear. Through all these years in this old house, I feel the same as ever. Inside the house, I'm still the boy, the teen, the man, whoever. But I can't escape reality. The old place is worn and weathered. This good old house now shows its age and makes me wonder whether it's almost time to sell the place and trade for something better. So I thought that was really good. Hope you enjoyed it too. um, so there is the description of life to death. Let me repeat then, point number 4 on your screen. We don't have forever to figure things out. While we still have our health, while we still have our mind, that's the time to make sure that we have our priorities in the right place and we have our relationship with God in the right place. Now, verse 8, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. Notice how he started the sermon with those words. Now he's ending the sermon with those words. And the ultimate vanity is death itself. And so as Solomon has brought us through a number of vanities, this is the biggie. This is the ultimate vanity, and that is death itself. Verse 9 through 11 is an interesting section where, as the sermon is drawing to a close, Solomon is going to affirm his credibility as a spokesman for God. Why should his words be heeded, especially the most important words that he's about to give us at the end? Is because he is speaking from God. God is the one that gave him his wisdom. And so he is sharing not truths from mortal man, but eternal truths from the all-knowing God. In addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, and he pondered, searched out, and arranged many proverbs. All right, so as every wise man should and would, he is going to try to figure out how to be the most effective communicator of these important truths. Solomon wanted to use his wisdom to impact in a positive way the lives of others. As a matter of fact, this whole book has basically been a description of Solomon's journey on trying to answer the most important question of life, and that is, what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? Now that Solomon thinks he knows the answer to that question, how can I communicate that with other people so that they go, that's right. That is the purpose of life. That's the purpose of my life. And if a person can get to that point and say, yes, that is the purpose of life, then Solomon would have succeeded in communicating this most important knowledge. I make the point a lot in the Bible, and because the Bible makes the point a lot, how vital it is that we have good, accurate information. Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Errors are what lead us to make bad decisions, bad judgments, but the truth is what will set you free, and especially in John 8, free from sin. The Old Testament prophet Hosea said in chapter 4 and verse 6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Well, failing to get that good information is what led to their ultimate spiritual demise. It is always important to God for us to have good information. That's why, as Peter is wrapping up his second epistle, he said, but grow in grace and the knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. We do need that knowledge. So Solomon, as a wise man, is thinking about the best way to communicate these vital, eternally important truths. So what he did is revealed in a number of verbs. First of all, he said he pondered the best way to write. The word pondered here actually is an unusual Hebrew word that occurs only here in all the Old Testament in its verb form. And it has to do with meticulous, careful, thoughtful evaluation. And so he was neither lazy nor was he unethical in his task. He spent considerable time, and we know that that's exactly what Solomon did in this book. He spent considerable time trying to figure out the best way to teach these important truths. Second, it says that he searched. All right, so he's looking for effective ways of communication. You know, we teach our preacher students to study great communicators, read books on how to be a great communicator, and most important, study Jesus as the master teacher. Why was he such a great and effective communicator? Well, by studying the life of Jesus and studying his words, we can pick up some valuable tips on how to be a good and an effective communicator. So he searched out. Well, we should search out as well. And then it says, third, he arranged many proverbs. All right, so now he's given considerable thought and effort to presentation, the arranging of things. You don't want to get the proverbial cart before the horse. You want to, if you've got an argument, you want to make sure that your arguments are those that are done in a systematic way that is ultimately going to lead to an unget-aroundable conclusion. And so he's arranging these proverbs. And as we've noted before, Solomon has written many proverbs, and a proverb is by definition a short, concise statement that has a very powerful, undeniable truth to it. And so a proverb is one of many literary styles, but it was certainly one of the literary styles of Solomon. And so he that wrote, according to 1 Kings 5 and verse 12, 3,000 proverbs, did give some thought to the structuring and the arranging of these proverbs so that it would have maximum impact. And then the fourth verse is found, the fourth description, verb, is found in verse 10. He sought to find delightful words. The wise man knows that communication is far more effective when the words are palatable. Paul makes the same point, does he not, in Colossians chapter 4 and verse 6. We want to make our words impactful and effective. And so if they're going to be that, they need to be delightful words. You don't want to run roughshod over people's feelings or bulldoze over them with the truth. They need to be expressed in a way that demonstrates love, patience, kindness, genuine concern for the people that you're teaching. So he wants to communicate in such a way that is going to maximize effectiveness. So it doesn't mean that he's willing to compromise the truth and that he's going to soften things down where they're going to be more palatable just for the sake of being something that is going to please people. Paul told the Ephesians, pray for me that I might preach boldly as I ought to speak. And then Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4 that he is going to encounter people that are going to want words, having itching ears according to their own lust. So they are going to accumulate teachers that are going to say things that feel so good, so pleasing. But that's not Solomon's point here. Solomon's point is, like Paul would say in Ephesians, speaking the truth in love. So you think about ways where it is as palatable, as acceptable as it possibly can be in the hearing of people. And then his fifth verb is he's going to write words of truth. The power of the printed page is something that was true even in Solomon's day. Scholars tell us that there were documents that would have predated Solomon by a couple of thousand years, 1,000 years for sure. If we date him about 940, well, we've had writings that date 2000 BC. So anyway, he wants to write the words of truth, and he wants to do it correctly. So they are words of truth. They need to be recorded accurately. So the wise man is certainly aware of the difficulty of teaching words that are both true and pleasing. That's a delicate balance that is not easy to do, but he recognizes that. Verse 11, the words of wise men are like goads, and masters of these collections are like well-driven. Well, I skipped over that slide, but The aging process, slow but inevitable, irreversible, and sad. So he made 3 observations about that aging process. And then he says, the words of wise men are like goads. Well, goads were like I've got illustrated there on the left, uh, sticks that had points to them. And those goads would be used to prod the cattle, to encourage those cattle to go in a certain direction. And so the words of the wise men are those that are designed to encourage people to go in a certain direction, moving people to action, moving people hopefully to God. And then, secondly, he says, and masters of these collections are like well driven nails. Well, it conveys the idea of words that have hit their desired uh, goal, their desired target, having firmly planted these words into the mind and the heart of people. Just like a well driven nail is going to attach, these well spoken words are going to stick. They're going to attach into the person's mind and heart. Anybody that has ever driven nails knows the frustration of a nail that doesn't make contact with anything but air, or it is driven into something to see it crumble and crack, and there's no way the nail is going to hold anything there. So every preacher and teacher knows the frustration of trying to teach something that isn't going to stick with people. He says, though, last part of verse 11, they are given by one shepherd. The one shepherd is God. And so Solomon, and having said all that he has said, is making one very valuable observation, and that is these words that he's given come from the one shepherd. They're inspired, in other words. He says, but beyond this, my son, be warned. The writing of many books is endless, and excessive devotion to books is wearying to the body. I try to keep this verse away from my students as long as possible, lest they turn right around and remind me that, well, I keep requiring all these books to be read. Solomon said it's wearying to the body. Well, it is wearying to the body, and there are many books. Did you know that in the Library of Congress, there are over 39 million books, and there are over 73 million manuscripts? That the Library of Congress has a total of 170 million written documents. That's mind-numbing. And it would be impossible for someone to even read a small portion of those books. And so when Solomon said that the writing of books is endless, boy, was he right there. And more books are constantly being written all the time. So then we get to verse 13. And he appropriately starts out by saying the conclusion. He's bringing the sermon to a close, but he is also going to now answer the most important question that was asked throughout the book. He says, when all has been heard, everybody has championed their particular viewpoint, their perspective on what is the purpose of life, what is the meaning of life, what is it that people should do. And Solomon has entertained every particular idea, every particular theory. All, he says, has been heard. So now the evidence considered, the answer to the ultimate question on how you need to live, I need to live, is going to be given. And he the points that he gives here are certainly in the right order. Fear God, keep his commandments. That's in the right order because we've got to begin with fearing God. Solomon said in Proverbs that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. In 1:7 is the beginning of wisdom in 10:23. So we've got to fear God. The word fear is the Hebrew word yare, Y-A-R-E. It is not a word that means respect or reverence, but it is a word that means fright or terror, uh, much more than a healthy respect. It's recognizing that God is great and all powerful and that we are going to be judged by this God, and there is nothing we can do to stop it. We all are going to appear before the judgment seat of Christ, 2 Corinthians 5:10. The great and the small, Revelation 20:11 through 15. You're going to be there. I'm going to be there. There's nothing we can do to stop that appearing before God. So that should create fear. Recognize our weakness, his greatness, our ignorance, his omniscience is the right thing to do. Jesus taught in Matthew 10 and verse 28 that we should fear God. The things that people are doing today, the sinful choices that they are making, are those that are being done by people that do not fear God. Because if they feared God truly, genuinely, recognize that he is going to bring them before him and he is going to hold them accountable and they are going to pay the price for the deeds that they've done in the body, whether good or evil, then maybe they would think better about the choices that they're making. And so with us, if we fear God and we recognize the fact that we will be before him on judgment day, then I'm going to make good choices. I'm going to make righteous choices. I'm going to study God's word, and I'm going to do my best to do what God has asked. That's what a person that fears God is going to do. All right, second, he says, and keep his commandments. The word keep is linear in force. And so he's not talking about doing something once or twice that is in line with God's commandments, but that you are continuing to keep. Day in and day out, you are obeying the commands of God. Continuous action. Well, and he says, keep his commandments. Commandments is in the plural. God has given us a number of commands. The Jews actually counted the number of commands in the Old Testament. 613 commandments was what they counted in the Old Testament. But Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments, John 14:15. And John also would write in 1 John chapter 2, verses 3 and following, that if one says that he knows God and does not keep his commandments, he is a liar and the truth is not in him. And so fear God then leads us to ask, what is it that God wants me to do? Because I fear him, I want to do it. When God frightened the people at Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 20 with the thunderous voice and all that, he said in verse 20, Exodus 20, verse 20, that I did this so that you might fear me, so that you would obey me. Fear leads to obedience. And that's the way God has operated with mankind. So we do need to fear him. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that John says in 1 John chapter 4 that perfect love casts out fear. So our journey, hopefully, is one that is going to lead us to obeying God, not because of fear, but because of love. Now, why are those two directives such a fitting conclusion? Why does Solomon say they are the conclusion? Those two things. Well, because of three reasons. First of all, he says it applies to everyone. How magnificent it is that Solomon was able to boil everything down into two observations that apply to every single person that has ever lived, any age, any time, any place. Who would you not want to tell, fear God, keep his commandments? Well, anybody, everybody, because it does apply to all. Second reason why this is the conclusion is because all are going to face God in judgment. He says this applies to every person because God will bring every act of judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. All right, so why do you need to tell people to fear God, keep his commandments? Because they're going to stand before God and be judged. And so the opportunity to give the purpose of life, the meaning of life to everybody has a real solid reason why this needs to happen because of that ultimate day of judgment where everybody is going to be judged, facing God in judgment. And then third is because these are words of salvation. If a person fears God and they keep his commandments, then he is going to say, well done, thou good and faithful servant, enter thou into the joys of thy Lord. Everything a person has done, including that which is hidden. So Jesus in John chapter 3 describes in verse 20 those people that they do their deeds in the dark because they don't want them exposed. Well, guess what? God sees at night like during the day, the Bible says there is nothing hidden from his sight. He sees all, even those evil deeds that are done in darkness are, as Solomon says here, which is hidden. So, but notice that Solomon is not trying to be all negative. He says, whether it is good or evil, God sees all. And the Hebrew writer in chapter 6 is going to say, God is not so unjust as to forget your work, that which you've done for him. So our God is the one that sees, he knows all. There is a great day coming. There is a great day, a judgment day that's coming. And so Solomon's conclusion of this great book is our conclusion as well. What can we say? What is the summation of this great book after everything that we've talked about? Is life with God is going to manifest itself in two very important ways. We're going to fear him. We're going to keep his commandments. That applies to you. That applies to me. And so the testimony to the inspiration of this book is the fact that Solomon was able, in a very concise way, to give us something that applies to everybody of every age, of all time, of every culture. Fear God, keep his commandments. What a great and fitting ending to this book. Thank you so much for staying with me in this study of Ecclesiastes. I hope it's motivated you and encouraged you, and most importantly, to remind you, fear God, keep his commandments. Thank you very much, and God bless.